All right.
Hey guys, it's Barbie Van Horn, Finding Fine Chocolate, and
Maddy Smith, Barefoot Chocolatini with I have a pink lantern above my head. I don't really look this.
oh, she's glowing pink.
I'm Aaron with Intrigue Chocolate.
I'm Finch, just I'm bigger.
And I'm Jess. I'm Dessert Geek on Insta and YouTube.
Sweet.
So we're chatting here with Maddy. This is kind of a Seattle stop for Maddy for people to ask questions about Hawaii, Hawaiian cacao, what's going on in the chocolate scene in Hawaii, so we get a better understanding of that.
Yeah. So we're going to record a podcast, and the fun thing is that you guys get to watch.
Yep.
So we'll see how this goes. We made a little nerd. We made a little list of
It's a nerd list.
Plant nerd questions. I can show you. So you can see where we're going to go with this. And yeah, I've had a lot of help asking really good questions on what people want to know about. And I'm just going to jump right in. Okay.
All right, what's the first question? Okay, now we're recording the podcast too.
All right, aloha everybody. I'm Maddy, Barefoot Chocolatini here, and I am in Intrigue Chocolate with Aaron
Bartle.
Finch.
Jess Tupper.
And Barbie Van Horn, Finding Fine Chocolate.
We have a bunch of questions today from these guys. They are very botany focused, and you do dessert photography for your blog.
Yep. I'm a dessert specialist.
Dessert specialist. So that means that you also work primarily with big companies to find out what angles and what they want their product to be marketed as.
I'm actually less consultant and more finding the awesome desserts.
Sweet.
But I like finding small makers like Aaron.
Yay.
Awesome. So when did you guys meet?
Oh goodness. It wasn't to Taste Washington.
No, but I feel like around that
Chocolate
time.
Festival, maybe?
Maybe.
Chocolate
Oh my
salon?
goodness. It was a while ago. I've been in the food community in F&B media since 2012, so somewhere in there. And I feel like I met Barbie soon after. Yeah, pretty early.
Pretty early, yeah. We were both kind of starting out, I think, or, hadn't been doing it too long.
Yeah.
I don't remember where I met you or where I ran into you, but we just somehow connected.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Possibly at one of the after-hour sessions up in the old chocolate kitchen.
That would make sense.
That's very possible.
Yeah.
The old Intrigue Chocolate Kitchen was this tiny little kitchen, and they had these great happy hours after hours that you just go into and nosh on chocolate, which I do pretty well.
Sounds pretty good to me. All right.
First question.
First question is, we're getting into fermentation. How is it done? Why do they do it? What happens during the process? This is one of the most complicated fermentations on the planet. And it's important to actually understand how it works.
Right.
So I'm sure you guys have probably fermented pickles and kombuchas and juns and lemonades and all sorts of water kefirs and
things we don't
else?
mean to ferment sometimes.
jams.
But we do. Yeah, jams.
So you can ferment pretty much anything. And I would say that I've heard that cacao fermentation is one of the most complicated fermentations.
Well, it doesn't just involve one species of microorganism, right? You're talking about a suite of fermentation, microbials, which is pretty awesome. And it's not just converting the sugars to alcohols. You're converting the flavors. So yeah, that sounds like a pretty complex thing. Being in Seattle, of course, I've never done that here.
Well, yeah, we can't ferment cacao beans here, but I think one of the most important things about learning about chocolate and the flavor is that so much of the flavor is actually developed in the ferment. Do you agree with that, or do you not agree with that?
I'd say that the flavor comes from every step of the way.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of it is in fermentation. A lot of it is in drying.
Okay.
So
tell us about the fermentation.
from what I've gathered from different people I learned from and listened to, in Hawaii we have some of the best educators in the world that talk about chocolate and cacao, and that's just part of the conversation. It's not the best part, it's just part of it. So I have Colin Hart, who is, basically mastering and post-harvest production for cacao, and Dan O'Doherty is like the top world geneticist for cacao, and then we have different world-class chocolate companies, Manoa and Madry Chocolate. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on the Big Island as far as Hawaiian Crown and Hilo making all their own bean to bar chocolate. Puna Chocolate, they make all their own bean to bar chocolate with a lot of inclusions. Pono Cod Chocolate, they make all their own bean to bar chocolate from one region in Hawaii.
Hawaii? Am I saying that right?
Hau'ilo Chocolate.
Hau'ilo Chocolate.
He farms and ferments and dries. Same with Puna Chocolate, same with Hawaiian Crown. It's pretty standard for most chocolate companies in Hawaii to have total control from bean to bar. So most of them are doing fermentation, they are doing their own drying, and they are doing their own roasting, winnowing, everything from cracking and winnowing to conching, tempering, pouring, molding.
Unique.
It's very unique. Yeah, it's quite the anomaly out there in the middle of the ocean. So to be in that world is really awesome. We have a lot of people doing a lot of different things happening in one place. I kind of see it all and I learn from it all, and then my goal is to share it all and to teach it all, and to have other world-class educators and nerds essentially come to one place in Hawaii. Sounds like a pretty good deal to me. And eat chocolate and talk about chocolate and grow the best chocolate, or some of the best, to put it in the world rankings of. We have Kona Coffee that did pretty well. The beer scene is growing. The wine scene is probably there. I haven't tapped quite into that one, but there's subtleties of it. And now the chocolate scene and the tea scene, green tea is like huge. It's a huge
Are they
world.
growing green tea in Hawaii?
Definitely
Some of
growing
the
green
best I've
tea
ever
on
tasted.
some of the best green teas ever tasted.
Wow.
So there's a myriad of awesome stuff going there. Our friends, they run Kula Shave Ice, and they make all their own fruit syrups from locally sourced, organically grown as possible, right?
They grow their own blue raspberries?
No, they don't have blue raspberry there, because that's not a flavor.
Right? It's really not.
Or is it?
I think we'd like to dream it is, if we're 90s kids.
Sure.
That's about it.
Blue raspberry. So anyway, they're great. Back to fermentation. In the world, the standard that I've heard is 2 to 5 days or 5 to 7 days for fermentation. And from my understanding, what I've observed and read and listened to as far as the process goes, you are taking proteins and you're turning them into amino acids. You're going to have a yeast, you're going to have a lactobacillus, and then you're going to have an acetic acid. So in my mind, I kind of equate that to bread, milk, and vinegar.
Totally makes sense. Yeah.
So when you're fermenting these beans, there's many different protocols. I'd say in bigger farms all over the world, which they are dealing with a massive amount of pods and beans to get one flavor, primarily chocolate. Let's grow the world chocolate, and let's have it taste like chocolate.
Yeah.
So that's what most of us grew up with and knew. But the really exciting part to me is that the fermentation implements such an interesting aspect that is so overlooked and so confusing, and there's so much to learn on single stage, multi-stage fermentation processes. People that are used to these chocolatey notes, most of that chocolate is being fermented as cacao beans in massive scales, huge piles, ginormous piles, whole barns that are almost full of beans. In Hawaii, I do it in a 5-gallon bucket. So I take it from a small scale to like an nth of the scale as a micro batch. And so those buckets are about 50 pounds each. I buy pods and I buy wet bean from local farmers. I want them to be my friends and essentially my family for the next 40 to 50 years. I want their kids and their grandchildren to want to work with me. I want this to be something where it's honest and true and beautiful and delicious, so that everybody can really experience what the potential of that is.
So I've got a question for you. How many pods does it take to get a ferment together for a micro batch like that for about a 5-gallon bucket?
So when I say 5-gallon bucket, I'm saying about 60 to 80% full of beans.
Mm-hmm.
Probably closer to the 70% mark. And I don't want it too full to the brim where it's going to overflow the bucket. I need enough room in the bucket to put some banana leaves or some sort of incubator. So you can, some people do styrofoam, which I don't want plastic next to my food. But traditionally it would be banana leaves with burlap sacks on the top to kind of, you're tucking your beans in at night is kind of the joke I'd make. I have them at home, and it's a full-time job. You have things to do on the farm, and you got things to do in a business, and you have things to do in a kitchen. And if you combine all that, you pretty much work all the time. So taking care of the beans and the plants, it's fun because you're interacting with something that's growing and living. But I would get that bucket from the farmers, or I would sit with the farmers and teach them how to do it. Teach them how to crack, teach them how to ferment, teach them how to prune. All the while, it's a win-win. I get to learn, I get to meet with these people, I get to build these relationships and get to know who they are and why they're there and what they're doing. And, one of my favorite farms, they almost cut down all their cacao trees because they didn't know what the hell to do with them. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you called me because you have amazing trees. There's a lot of cacao out there that hasn't really been accounted for, or it's neglected, or it's just people don't know what to do with it, or they just grow one tree. But as far as your question goes, how many pods is it? You can do it probably with 500 pods.
For a bucket?
Anywhere from 300 to 500 pods.
For 5 gallon, for 70%
so.
of a 5-gallon
I think
bucket?
so.
Wow.
I'd have to really check my notes to do that, but
wow,
one pod
is quite a bit more than I thought.
Yeah.
But I've only done one micro ferment ever, and so I can't say that I'm expert on that.
it'd probably be really realistically like 250 to 400 pods. And these are, so working with Dan, there's part of this Intrigue Chocolate. They did this chocolate experience in Maui, and you need to keep track of your pods like a business. So you're harvesting pods, you're weighing the pod on a scale, you're writing down your numbers, you're getting your average for one tree, how many pods did you get in that harvest, how much per pod do they weigh, and then you discard the pod, and now you're left with the wet bean, and how much wet bean is of that weight. We're not necessarily getting to the point of measuring bricks, but I'm sure some people do, because if you think about fermentation, the more sugar you have, you're playing faster you ferment, different flavors you get. So there's a whole myriad of opportunity for people to really manipulate, observe, learn, duplicate, accidentally stumble into. So much room for dynamic variations of outcomes.
Well, here's where you get into the point where the chocolate world and cacao world offers something for people of so many different mindsets.
No, yeah.
So you have the scientists who measure every single variable, and you have the artists who are like, I don't know, whatever happens. And then you have the kind of alchemical approach, which is halfway in between, where you're measuring some things and then letting the chips fall where they may from there. It sounds like you lean a little bit more towards the measure everything, but not all the way there.
Yeah, a little bit of both. I like some trial and error.
Yeah.
On purpose. I want to see, like I was telling Barbie, I was pushing my limits. I want to know how many days can I go not stirring my beans. Because it's a real world application.
Yeah.
I'll be able to see if I need to go out of town, how many days can I be away without having to rely on someone to look after my beans. You have to babysit them. You turn them during the day. You make sure the temperature is not too hot. If it is, you need to alter it. You need to check on it. You need to make sure that when you're stirring it, you're really getting all the corners. You're getting all those little nooks and crannies. You're not breaking the beans. You know, you want a beautiful product when you're done. And fermentation is huge.
So I've heard some people argue that variation within the process itself can add variety of chemical outcome, which can add a more dynamic flavor profile. So let me explain that. There's a lot of words. So for instance,
I got it.
I believe John Nancy, the chocolate alchemist, doesn't do much sorting of his beans before he roasts and processes, because he has done tests that show that if he did some that were unsorted and made it into chocolate, and some that were very sorted and made them into chocolate, that the well-sorted one made a less interesting chocolate. And I'm sure there is a line on the other side of defect makes bad chocolate. But so in fermentation, I imagine that some people would make the argument that if you have corners in a larger vessel, so there's more variation of fermentation outcome, just by the nature of not being able to stir corners very well, and the conditions being different in the corners, that there is potentially a more dynamic flavor profile of outcome, but it's uncontrollable.
It's controllable to an extent. You know, because when I say corners, I'm not saying that, like, yeah, they're corners, but, you know, if you're using, like, a grain scoop, you clear out that, and so you would take this box of beans and you get into this box of beans. For mine, since they're circles, I have a paddle for beer making, but I do dump them halfway into another bucket and kind of stir those. Because because I want the temperatures to spread out. I want to have an even distribution of temperature, and I want to make sure that even if the core is really hot, those outsides in a circle will still be cooler, and the top will be different from the bottom. So it needs to be balanced. It's like a magnet.
Actually, since the fermentation size is so small, does the type of material for the bucket impact things like the incision size?
I'm sure.
And you mentioned disliking plastic on your food.
My buckets are plastic.
Okay. Which makes sense. It's more just, do you need to line them more? Does that impact flavor?
You could. I think it's a little too superfluous. But you're on the right track. So basically what I got from John Nancy's story is that if you're picking apart all of the perfect beans, the defected beans, you're going to get a flatter flavor profile, or a more focused one, without the nuances in the front, the back, or the side. I liked what you said about defects, because, you know, talking to this guy, he's been selling, he's a wine broker, a grape broker, so he does grapes and wines. He also sells primarily to the home wine makers club. There's over 800 home winemakers in California, in the Northern California area. That's huge. That's a totally growing, sleeping, sleepy little industry that, you know, food nerds in one industry, we don't necessarily always pop our head up above water and take a look around at what's going on with the rest of these industries, but it's important that we do, because coffee and craft beer, even the olive oil scene, there's so much to learn. So what I'm getting at with that is that he described how to taste wine, and the number one thing he's basically pointing toward is you need to be able to identify defects. Because if you have something that is amazing, and then you can pull out the defects, it's even better. And a lot of things are mediocre, and not really that great. And not all chocolate's created equal.
The reason I like talking about defects, I mean, there's some things that are just repugnant, like the taste of mold in your chocolate. And it happens. I think most of us who've gotten nerdy with our chocolate have tasted a chocolate where you just taste defect, primarily.
Oh, yeah.
But there's also some things, like in wine, if you perceived a banana note, for the longest time, that was an off ferment. There was another organism that got in there that fermented that created a banana note. But sometimes somebody's defect is somebody else's, oh my god, that's amazing. Which is why having some variability in your process or doing experimentation with your process allows you to experiment and find something that can be the new awesome. Once you know what it is and how to control it, so that it's not showing up when you don't want it. That moldiness or a diesel tasting chocolate will never be anybody's yum.
Oh, no.
But there are things that some people consider a super tart fruit note, which is usually a product of fermentation in their chocolate, to be a defect. But other people absolutely love the juicier, super sour chocolate. So,
Totally subjective. A great opinion, a great conversation. Yeah. Because we all grew up and knew and loved chocolatey chocolate, and now there's flavor profiles coming out, leather and tobacco and rose hips and lavenders and cloves and spices and these fruity, sour, citrusy notes. Today I love them, but I'll probably burn out on them, and then I'll change to another piece of the pie in a couple years. I think caramely, buttery notes are delicious. Marshmallowy notes. I love that Dandelion puts on all their bars, their 3 main flavor notes. That's crucial because you're setting the stage for what people are going to expect of your bar, and then they can find it. Some of it's placebo, so during tastings, especially with new tasters, I don't want people's ideas to be influencing someone else's idea of what they think they taste. But, with experienced tasters, sometimes it's more fun for everybody to just throw out flavors.
So you like the flavor notes on the packages?
I love it.
Do you always read them?
If I know they're there.
Do you agree with them?
No.
Okay. That's where I'm going.
I agree with most of them. Sometimes there's notes I can't find. Sometimes.
So do you prefer to taste with the flavor notes or blind?
Sometimes I prefer to do blind and then read the flavor notes so that I can test myself against what they think they find.
Ditto.
To teach myself.
That's what you do.
Well, sometimes I worry that the packaging was written for a different harvest or a different, because sometimes you taste it like absolutely not. That's not in there, and everybody's palate's different, so that could just be the person who wrote that tasted that exact batch and they perceive that thing and I don't. But it's tricky when you print packaging, unless you're printing small batch, which is very expensive. You're printing for a year. Do you have enough of the exact same batch of chocolate from the exact same batch of beans to get for the whole year?
And in Hawaii, where you're doing really, really small batches,
so that gets tricky.
That could change quite a bit.
All the time.
Yeah.
Limited release.
Yep.
Single estate. I mean, I understand
harvest to harvest.
Yeah,
I mean,
why they have like the date stamp for the harvest, batch number. So there needs to be a better way to address that, because I think that is part of the fun, is having a small batch. And if packaging printing is like astronomical, then how is the business owner going to make it? We need to have businesses that are around to thrive for the long haul. And I think a lot of people get into the business very short-sighted, and they don't necessarily have the tools or, the longevity or the drive or the exit strategy. Like, just build it for 5 years and exit then. Build it great. But anyway, most people get into it because we love it.
Yep.
And we're not business people, but we should be. For farmers and for makers and for everybody that gets involved, because then we can have longevity as far as relationships, and we can all actually invest into something and make it really awesome. That's just my personal 2 cents. Any other questions on fermentation?
Yes.
There's a lot more there.
Oh dear.
Right. So you said you ferment a month? You ferment until it's done.
I ferment until it's done.
And you ferment long.
I ferment long.
Does that mean you generally ferment cooler?
No.
Really?
So I've experimented, and you should experiment too. But I've set up an incubation station, is what I call it. It's essentially, you're looking like,
Sounds so fun.
It is fun.
Go to Hawaii.
Come to Hawaii.
I
Yeah,
will,
it's-
yes.
It is really
Ferment
fun.
with Maddy.
Yay! So it's in an old freezer, a chest freezer, and I have a light bulb in there, and then I have my 5-gallon bucket, and sometimes I have 2 5-gallon buckets, and sometimes I have 3 5-gallon buckets. It's kind of, it needs to be readjusted, my system. I was doing banana leaves, and the reason for multiple buckets is because a bigger harvest or 2 different batches from 2 different farms. Put them in there. I spritz a little bit of bread yeast water, foam. I want the foam from it. So I'll do 1 cup sugar, or 1 tablespoon sugar, 1 tablespoon yeast, and then a cup of water. 1, 1, 1. I'll let that rise. I'll take that foam, spritz it in there, and I mix it all around. So now I've inoculated it with yeast. I do that. Not
Yeah, you
everybody
don't
does
have to,
that. You
right?
don't have to do that.
So you think it speeds it up, slows it down?
I
What
think
do
it
you- how
gives
do-
me a
what's
little
the-
bit of insurance.
Okay, that we're actually going to get things started. Uh-huh. Okay.
Some people think that there's enough yeast in the air on the back of the banana leaves, on a cacao pod. I don't know. This is just what works for me now. So I put that in there, I cover them with banana leaves, and then what I've evolved from is instead of doing the banana leaves, because if I'm using a light bulb to incubate my little chamber, I don't want it to dry out that top layer of goo. So the wet beans are covered in a slimy fruit, and that is the sugar that feeds the fermentation. So if you have fruit that's picked too late, then the sugar will degrade. That'll affect your fermentation. If you have fruit that is picked too soon, you don't have enough sugar in that fruit. It's drier and starchier. That'll affect your fermentation. So ideally, in a perfect world, everybody's fruit would be the same age, and it would be beautiful fruit that you would want to buy in the market. You would want to pick the best fruit when you buy all your produce, right?
Right.
You don't want the wilty, sad, droopy, picked 3 weeks ago, shipped in fruit.
Right.
So all of that will deal with your fermentation. So you can see at every single step of the way impacts the life inside that bucket. Put the lid on. I set my light on a timer because remember, I want to do as little as possible. I have other things to do, and I want to automate. So I set the timer to go with the light from, it's like midnight to 6 a.m. By then, I should be awake doing stuff. And I go in there and I stir the beans. And that's my protocol. I check the beans after about a week, and I stir once a day. And when I cut them open, I cut them down the middle, open it up like a book, and if it's brown, it's done. If it's purple, to me, it's not done. If it's slaty and grayish purple, it's in between. It's pretty straightforward. And so I'm picking the fattest beans. I want to get an average, so I'll do like basically a small handful each time. Because if one of them is still purple and the other ones are all brown, it's done. Like, you need to just think about it. It's not brain science. I mean, it is a little bit of like, you're working on things that affect your brain, so there's that, but it's more intuitive than people make it out to be, I would
Well, if
say.
you have some that are varying fermentation levels, if the whole batch is, for the most part, at the right spot, you're going to get that variation of flavor, that depth of flavor. I think what you were talking about earlier, Erin. I think that's going to lend to that too.
Yeah, I
Right.
will.
Very good.
What do they look like if you over ferment?
I have no idea. So I could be over fermenting. Because the beans are still going to ferment a little bit on the drying rack. You can wash your beans. You don't have to wash your beans. You're washing off fermentation. I think some of that stuff on the outside helps the flavor develop even more. It's just another piece to the puzzle. Some people, they cover their beans and only dry them for 3 to 5 hours a day until they're done. Other people dry them for all day, you know, in what's it called? Why is it not recording? It says recording, but
It's
no,
not active.
mic trouble.
We have about 5 more minutes or so.
Yeah, before you close.
Maximum? Yeah, before we close up.
Here.
Before I run out of memory.
Oh, no.
So
It can be fermentation hour.
it's the fermentation hour with Maddie. We're gonna have to cover the other topics. You know, definitely. But where were you?
Are you tracking temperature logs the whole time? Are you doing
Yes.
daily or multiple times a day? Or?
Yes. Definitely.
That's the scientist part of you.
Definitely check the temperature. I want to know where it's at, where it's going. It's a little false positivity because there's heat from a lamp.
Right.
The stranger things I've seen in the chocolate is that when it's fermenting, depending on the amount of yeast and other bacteria that are in there and the level of sugar, it'll get really slimy. And I don't know what that means. Sometimes it's definitely a fungal growth. I think it's normally not suggested, but the flavor is nice.
So it doesn't always get slimy like that. It just sometimes gets slimy like that. Is that what you're
it's a
saying?
temperature thing. Like
Okay.
it might even be a bacterial die-off. Like the good guys are now kicked out of town, and
Interesting. Do you notice a difference in the flavor of the beans at the end of the ferment, or a specific, if a batch gets slimy or you see it at that point at the end of it, do you have a consistency of flavor that you're seeing from all the slimy batches? I hate to call them slimy batches. That doesn't sound like something we'd want to eat. But if you've seen the fermentation process, there are some parts of it that aren't that pretty.
no, a lot of it's not very pretty.
But
I need
I
to
think that's
take
okay.
better notes.
okay.
That's what I'll need to get back to you on that because
Okay.
I've witnessed it, I've observed it, but I did not necessarily denote it.
All right. We'll look for your slimy notes.
I
on
might have the
chocolates.
notes as how it went, but I do not have the notes for how it's tasted in comparison to the others.
Good. Do we have time for like one last little bit on fermentation? What else would you say?
I was actually curious about humidity monitors. As I was listening to it, reminded me of a research project I knew about in grad school that I will tell you off camera because it's very funny but long. And my immediate thought was, I'm surprised at the limited amount of technology. So would a humidity monitor help here, or is it a thing that's common? Because it's such a small batch. I'd want to know, especially with the slimy situation, if humidity is impacting die-off.
It's a great question. I have no idea. I think that humidity monitors become more pertinent when we're drying beans because it can be super sunny 1 minute and then it can be like a torrential downpour or sprinkles the next. And if you're drying your beans outside in an open air situation, just like in any other South American or country where cacao grows, normally it's growing in or near a rainforest. So I think that humidity monitoring is important in order to figure out basically where your bean is at the end of the day, and then you can kind of track that in the morning and see how much more humidity it gained overnight, because there's humidity in the air and there's a dew point, and the sun goes down, heat or dew rises up. So there's that, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's more just something to keep in mind as far as flavor development and tracking how that is going to show up in a final product.
It's so complicated.
It's so complicated, but it's so cool. There's so many layers to it. Some people leave their beans out all day, all night. They come back and they're more moist in the morning. some people, like I said earlier, they cover them for 3 to 5 hours during the day, or they have them exposed for 3 to 5 hours. So there's different protocols depending on where you are and what you're going for and what your style is and what you want, and how much labor you want to put in. That's a big part of it. I mean, let's be honest, like, people are busy. They got shit to do. And forgetting your beans might happen. You can also, I've done this experiment that I didn't have my fermentation chamber set up quite yet.
Yeah.
And instead I had a car, which I thought would get enough heat outside. So I set up a small incubator inside the car.
How did that smell?
2 different pots. Nobody wanted to drive in my car after that. I like it because it means that chocolate's coming. So the long and the short of it is I fermented in the car. I turned the heater on the car. I had the pots on the floor mats because it's closer to the vent. And I needed the pot to make pot roast, so I had to abort my fermentation, which meant it now is pushed through into the drying section. So I had 2 drying racks also in the car, one on the driver's side and one on the passenger side. And the car is clean, like, it's not a gross car. And I never moved the car while I was drying the beans. And I think I would turn the heater. I think at that point I didn't need the heater anymore because they just needed to dry and it was sunny enough. But the comparison at the end was vastly different because some of them were red and fruity and bright and acidic, and some of them were dark, chocolatey, nutty. And the only thing that changed was this side of the car they came from. Being in the sun to being in the shade.
Oh, amazing.
That is awesome.
Amazing.
I look forward to the point where, like, we think of, the public thinks of chocolate makers as being, oh my God, you're a chocolate maker. And sometimes farmers get respect for taking care of their plants and choosing the right plants and, you know, treating them right and harvesting right. But I think that people who develop the skills and know-how around fermentation and drying, like, that is a life's work of skilled labor, yes, but that is a skilled profession. Yeah. There's so many variables in this 2 subsets of the process. That's insane. I don't think that gets enough credit.
Yeah, it's great. It's totally fascinating.
Something we can't do here.
On that note, I think we need to sign off.
We need to sign off because it's time to close Intrigue Chocolate tonight. And but thank you so much, Maddy. Thank you guys. Thank you for anybody who's listening out there. Thank you. I know I pop my head back all the time because I wanted the focus to be here on Maddy. But thank you guys for being here.
Yeah, thank you guys. It sounds like we need to do more of this.
I think we'll do a lot more of this because I'm just fascinated by the science behind it. And there's so much we can't do here in this area because we're not in a tropical rainforest.
You guys get to do so much other stuff.
But we get to taste. So I will continue to taste.
Awesome.
Don't worry about that.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.
Aloha.